This is a brief episode to restart the podcast after a hiatus of several weeks. I started the podcast full of enthusiasm to release an episode every week, and then some pretty big events happened personally, so lots of things were on hold, including the podcast. As has happened many times in my life before, horses have helped to point a few things out to me during this time. So I thought I would talk about the topic of coping and thriving, because this is, after all, the Vital Horse podcast, aiming to help you and your horses really thrive. Vitality, as opposed to just the absence of disease, is the vision here. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi there, I'm Lily. Welcome to the Vital Horse podcast. I'm a veterinary surgeon passionate about what our animals' behaviour can alert us to. I focus on nurturing the innate nature of animals to address the deep roots of health, well-being and vitality. Our relationship with our horses is an inextricable part of this. I am guided by what they show me. Many people say, if only they could talk, but they can tell us so much and we can communicate back. This podcast is about you being able to help your horse fully by finding out what's going on, deciding how best to help, and then doing this ethically and effectively. In this way, we can investigate and treat behavioural signs and underlying health problems, pain, or dysfunction in our horses while actually improving our relationship with them. Let's find out how. I've called this episode topic Coping and Thriving because I think all sentient beings probably fluctuate between states of feeling on top of the world, feeling stable, secure and content, feeling a bit stretched but in a stimulating way, feeling like they are just about managing, and feeling like they are drowning or free falling and really not coping, and many things in between. I've been musing on this for both people and for horses partly because the state that each of us come together in will have a big impact on our communication, and ultimately, depending on how sort of stuck or fluid we are between these states, will affect our health and well-being long term. So this applies to both horses and humans. It also will affect our assessment of them. If we're a vet or a body worker, for example, it's likely to affect what we find on a physical examination. So I'm always very mindful of how I am approaching what state, physiological and psychological and emotional state, my body is in when I am assessing another sentient being. As well as my own exploration of coping and thriving personally, the inspiration for this episode's topic also comes from having recently seen a fair few social media posts and discussions around the evolution of types of horsemanship that have swung, in quotation marks, too far in the opposite direction from types that would be based more in dominance theory, or maybe types that would be based in seeking outcomes, for example, getting the horse into a particular frame, or perhaps competition success, to the exclusion of considering how the horse feels about the situation. So less of a partnership-based approach. And the criticisms or observations of approaches that do consider how the horse feels, and maybe that sometimes involve a lot of doing not very much, or slowing down a lot, and maybe that even involve some almost spiritual or ritual practices with horses, or maybe not during your time with horses, but in your personal life, and that involve some personal exploration. The criticisms seem to often be that you aren't actually helping. Maybe you don't get anything done with your horse. The horse doesn't learn needed life skills. You might think you're developing this magical connection, but it's actually false. You're being sold some kind of fluffy lie. On the other hand, I frequently see the wholesale rejection, and sometimes very aggressively and by the act of shaming people of methods that are dominance based or are fear inducing or are just more outcome focused than feelings focused. So I guess the one thing that I would say about that is a little bit that it is completely your own personal choice. And I don't really think that there is any place for this shaming of how people choose to conduct their relationships, whether that's with other people or with their horses, aside from obvious ethical concerns. But these sorts of discussions made me think about coping and thriving because everyone, again, horses and humans, um, every being is navigating their own stuff and coming at each new day with a whole history that affects everything from the structure and organization of their physical body, their physiology or bodily functions is kind of another way of defining physiology, their learning and their thoughts, and their emotional landscape. When we consider all of these things, it really doesn't make much sense and is certainly not very compassionate to go down the shaming route. But having these conversations is definitely important and beneficial to us all without getting into an aggressive or a self righteous place. So, the way in which we connect with our horses and, in quotation marks, get things done with them is that it's a whole soup of our stuff, the horses' stuff, lots of other external factors that might change based on the time of day, the season, all sorts of things, and then some weird stuff that happens when all of that mixes together. So I know my ethical stance on different aspects of horsekeeping and interacting with horses or with other beings, and I sometimes fail. And I know it will be different, a different framework from some other people's. So we need to be able to have these conversations about horse welfare, horse keeping, our interactions, our communication with them, what we consider to be ethical training, in order to expand our own understanding. It's helpful to have these conversations with other people who have different experiences and they're coming at things with a whole different raft of a lifetime of learning. So this is having these conversations in this way is far easier said than done sometimes. And for example, some people will come at things more from a scientific evidence base uh, point of view, and some people will come at it with more of a feel and intuition. I don't think that those things are as separate as is sometimes described. I also don't think scientific evidence is the be all and end all. I sometimes don't do so well on the compassion front, and sometimes I completely doubt my feel. So we just have to muddle along somehow. So, what about coping and then thriving? I titled this episode Coping and Thriving, not coping versus thriving, because I don't actually think that thriving means the absence of any difficulties in our lives, including for horses. So that doesn't mean we should be deliberately introducing unnecessary or unethical stressors to them, but it does mean we don't need to panic about them just dealing with life. So, some thoughts that I have about this. Thriving doesn't come about from not having any stressors to cope with. It's not about sterilizing our lives or only working on building positives. It's about facing the difficulties and finding healthy, sustainable ways to cope with those inevitable tasks that come up. And then we will actually thrive overall. So for horses, it's not about making everything absolutely ideal and perfect. However admirable and advisable it is to strive to improve their lifestyle and well-being, of course, I think that's a good aim. It's a definitely worthwhile aim. It's about identifying and working on ways of helping them and us to navigate through life. And it isn't the stressor so much often as the capacity to cope or compensate. And horses actually have this in spades. the capacity to compensate, which means that it's often quite confusing. Are they showing some kind of a compensation pattern for something? Um, and that's a whole unraveling of figuring out what it is that's going on for them often. When thinking about this topic, I thought about the definitions of resistance and resilience from ecology. So they might have a slightly different definition to what you would first think of as resistance and resilience in other contexts. In ecology, the word resistance means that an ecosystem is unlikely to change with the addition of changing variables. So it has more resistance to, say, for example, becoming a different type of ecosystem. It has a lot of capacity to absorb different conditions before it would change into a different ecosystem. So something with a very low resistance, for example, might be a grassland that very easily will turn into a desert without very much changing condition. But something with a lot of resistance might be, say, for example, a forest that can withstand frequent forest fires and ah no, actually, I should make the definition of resilience before I say about that. Perhaps a better example would be a system that could take in a huge amount of rainfall without it, say, washing away the soil structure, and so it's still very much the same system after that event. Resilience, on the other hand, is the ability of a system to bounce back. So it changes with a variable, but it goes back to the state that it was in before, or at least a healthy state. Now, tangled up with this concept is actually our human need for a certain type of stability. So we've made these definitions in ecology about almost how strong resistance or resilience the ecosystem is to changing variables. Because to us in our, actually it's our current Western worldview, not maybe not so much a more ancient or an indigenous worldview, is that these systems have to stay the same as they are now. That is how they should be, as opposed to a fluid, it's okay if this grassland becomes a desert, or it's okay if this forest becomes a wetland. We would actually tend to have a negative judgment about that in our societal view currently. So that's just something to say about that, because in thinking about a being, a sentient being, as its own kind of ecosystem, which we all are, within a wider ecosystem, we do kind of need to look at, are we wanting a particular state and judging others as less than a particular other state? So we sort of need to know what it is that we are aiming for in order to know whether our horse is, for example, being resistant to a change or being resilient. And so resilience in terms of a body could be its ability to heal, for example. So a horse gets an injury, and then they would be more resilient if they were able to heal well back to their former functional, healthy state. And the resistance would be that they were less likely to injure in the first place. That would be a kind of analogous to those ecosystem kinds of definitions. So I think this is quite a useful concept to think about when it comes to thriving, because we aren't going to have a situation where there is no possibility of our horse becoming injured, for example. And that also could apply to mental, emotional sorts of injuries. And of course, we don't want to introduce them unnecessarily. Um, but when we're talking about building their ability to thrive, then the coping strategies, we might increase their resistance, not in the sense of, for example, not being able to change, the resistance to a healthy functional state being upset by changing variables, or their resilience. So something external happens and they're able to bounce back from it. There is a lot of language in the horse world that frames things in a very outcome-based way. So, for example, producing horses, solving problems, um, that kind of language. Actually, or healing or curing, those kinds of words as well. They can have a lot of judgment attached to them sometimes. Actually, things are always a process, always a practice. We're always working on something. I'm not sure whether it's particularly helpful to frame things in terms of, for example, um, we do another scan, and yes, your horse's tendon has healed, and that's sort of cut off. That chapter is over, and now we can just go back to exactly what it was we were doing before. I'm not convinced by that view. In my view, something has happened to this body, which is still the same body. Yes, you may have had a clinical resolution of a problem, but there's the question of why did it perhaps happen in the first place? So you might know that for certain there might have been a somewhat freak accident that made it happen. Or it might have been a wear and tear from the way that your horse carries themselves and moves long term. And that's actually what we need to address, even if you have a clinical resolution on a scan, for example. So I feel like there's always a practice and a working on something that it's helpful to have that as an expectation as opposed to having the expectation that things are done and dusted. You know, you can have there's this term, the all clear from the vets, which makes me laugh. If we think in a more outcome based way, pretty soon we will have a horse that comes along that will humble us, I think. And there's a very important thing to say about timescales. So, in some moments, your horse might be on top of the world, feeling stretched but stimulated. In some moments, they might be just about managing. In some moments, they might not be coping. If we're looking at the overall aim of overall thriving with episodes of needing to be resilient, so bounce back from things, or be resistant, so maintain health and function through a difficult period, then I think that's maybe more of a beneficial framework and more of a realistic framework than thinking that they need to always be thriving and never have any difficulty to cope with, or settling for not really ever thriving. So, in terms of some practical aims, horses do need to be able to express their normal behavior. So, this includes eating for at least 16 or so hours per day, sometimes longer, depending on the type of forage that they're eating. Being able to move freely, not just when under the control of a human being, so make choices about that. Be able to sleep properly, both standing up and lying down. Having the company of other horses without being bullied by them. So, having good company with other horses and being in with those other horses. There are a lot of debates around that, and in some cases, it might not be safe for certain horses to have company without a fence or something in between them. But as a general rule, having the company of other horses, not just over a fence, and being able to roll, scratch themselves, mutual groom with other horses. They need to be comfortable in their mind and body. So we have a responsibility to recognize and address pain if it is present. And that might mean using pain relief for it. It might mean alleviating certain stresses if it's more psychological, emotional kind of discomfort. It might mean not asking certain things of their body. So maybe not riding them for now, or sometimes even possibly stopping riding them long term. It might mean changing their saddle. It might mean addressing their foot function and comfort. So there's all sorts of, that's an enormous subject, of course, but they do need to be comfortable in both mind and body. And they need to be able to understand what is going on when we ask things of them. And if they don't understand, then it's our responsibility to break things down into smaller chunks, go back several steps, maybe present it in a different way to them. This is a quick reminder that the Needle Shyness online course starts running live for 12 weeks on the 1st of July. For an ethical and effective approach to helping needle-shy horses, go to www.nurturingnatureequine.co.uk/needles. There is definitely a sea change happening at the moment in the horse industry, and it is towards kinder, more wholehearted, more sustainable ways of being and keeping horses and interacting with them, which is incredibly heartening and definitely to be celebrated. I meet lots of owners and professionals who really want to help horses to thrive and to help them to find healthier coping strategies as well. So often these owners and professionals, they might be coming up against certain practical barriers to putting in place the things that they would like to put in place. So maybe rules at the place where they keep their horse, setups that practically don't allow fully for this healthy lifestyle that I just described, perhaps time or money constraints. Something that I have been pondering quite a lot is kind of being a victim to your situation and thinking that you're trapped in that situation. So I don't want to discount the fact that often there are genuinely difficult obstacles to overcome, but it is worth checking in on your mindset around this, because feeling stuck in a situation and powerless to change anything is very uncomfortable in itself. It can sometimes feel like it's true. Sometimes it might be more true than at other times. So actually, often more uncomfortable is being an agent of change in your situation. And very often our nervous system tries to keep us safe by telling us that we are stuck, we're powerless in this situation. The situation is happening to us or despite us. But actually, what is often true is that there is a way to be an agent of change in your situation. I would even go so far as to say that there is always the possibility to be an agent of change in your situation, even if that is just that you hold on to your own beliefs in a situation. But it's uncomfortable. So there might be a fear that you might lose something that you hold dear, which could include maybe how certain people think about you, for example. I have been in livery yard situations in the past where I wanted to keep the peace. I didn't want to be seen as a troublemaker or that kind of thing. But I actually realized in time that the lack of change from that keeping the peace and holding on to staying in that place where I wanted to keep my horse meant that ultimately I had to leave that place anyway, because it wasn't set up in a way that I could, in my own conscience, I could continue to keep my horse that way. So I say we need to find ways of having these conversations to allow our horses and ourselves to better cope and to thrive, and to have all of these, the lifestyle factors, that to be comfortable in their mind and their body, and for us to be able to communicate well. So that was a very brief episode for now of my musings on the topic of coping and thriving. I don't think they are totally separate entities. Instead, they are both part of the rich tapestry of life. We all deserve to thrive, and we all deserve the capacity to cope with navigating life. Lots of aspects of domestication affect our ability, again, both domesticated horses and domesticated humans, to be resistant, resilient, and to thrive. And identifying and expanding on these is beneficial, I think. Horses can teach us a huge amount about this. We basically just need to watch them and see what it is they need. And it often gives us some very useful pointers for ourselves too in that process. In this vein, coming up is another online workshop on my approach called Attuned Assessment. So if you sign up now, the webinars and videos and PDF guides are in the online member area. There are 3 Zoom Q&A calls with me and a 30-minute one-to-one call also on all on how to assess your horse to answer questions like, have we really ruled out pain? What do they need? That could be in terms of lifestyle. Maybe how do they best learn? So all sorts of things to do with that, providing their species appropriate lifestyle, providing them with comfort, physical, mental, and emotional, and communicating well with them. The first Zoom call is on the 28th of May. To sign up, go to www.nurturingnatureequine.co.uk/attune, and you will find the link also in this episode's show notes. Hope to see you there. Thanks for listening to the Vital Horse podcast, where you can find discussions focused on helping horses in ways that combine scientific principles and evidence with compassion and understanding. Do subscribe if this content has rung true for you. To work with me in a way that honours both head and heart, check out my online and in-person offerings at www.nurturingnatureequine.co.uk. If you are facing problems or are trying to answer questions with your horse, remember that physical, mental, and emotional well-being are inextricably interconnected, that there is a wisdom to nature and to the body that we can assist, and that cultivating meaningful relationships with our animal companions holds an important key to the well-being of all of us. Deep awareness and a compassionate process will enable us to find sustainable, ethical solutions. See you for the next episode and look forward to working with you too.